I've mentioned smallpox before, and it's really a horrible disease, and it is a great thing that it has been gotten rid of. So you'll never see smallpox. It was hideously disfiguring. Um, People just looked absolutely horrible. Some people with smallpox got it so bad that all of their skin peeled off, and it's just nasty. But here, the smallpox is being viewed as if it had been some curse for something that these people had done. And it probably wasn't. Well, it wasn't. I mean, smallpox is fairly contagious, and it spreads. And so that's one of the reasons why the boss wanted to keep the king out, because he didn't want the king to catch smallpox, because if the king catches smallpox, then, um, well, it could kill him. There's not much that can be done to treat smallpox. Mostly it consists of keeping the patient alive. There are probably medicines now that might work against it, but those medicines were developed well after smallpox was wiped out, so who knows how well the medicines work. But smallpox is a virus, and it's a rather large virus, which is weird. It's actually bigger than some bacteria are. But anyway, so here you had this family, and their lord decided that he wanted to plant fruit trees on the land that they farmed for him. And I know I've mentioned this before about how serfdom works, because back during this time, you had land, and you had lords who owned the land. And then you had people who were serfs, and the serfs were attached to the land. So if I were a serf, I would have, the piece of land that was mine. But it's more like I belong to the land. And so whoever it was who actually owned the land would own me along with the land. And so he would go and he would have me harvest his crops. And I would be allowed to keep a small plot of land in the larger plot. And then I would be able to live off of whatever I did there. And then I would be allowed to keep a garden there, which would be enough to feed me, hopefully. But in this instance, the king took the best part, which these people had been using for their garden, and put fruit trees there. And because they're his fruit trees, they aren't allowed to have the fruit. And besides, he put them there 3 years ago, and fruit trees, it takes 5 or 6 years, 10 years before you actually start getting real fruit out of them. I've tried planting fruit trees. I've never gotten fruit that I've grown myself. There's a couple of apple trees in my backyard that were there when I moved into the house, and I've eaten the apples off of them and made pies. But I mean, they were there. They were there when I bought the house 25 years ago, 24 years ago. They were there when I bought the house 24 years ago. They were already big and giving fruit. But it takes 5, 10 years for a fruit tree to give fruit. And so after 3 years, these might be 6, 7 feet tall, but they won't have much more than 1 or 2 pieces of fruit on them, because trees in their early years spend all of their energy growing, and then they worry about making fruit. Just like people. People don't get fully grown up until they're, 18, 20 years old. I mean, your brain's developing almost until 25, so you're still growing all the way up to 25, so slowly developing, and then you actually start producing and working and making money. Anyway, so the king and the fruit trees, or the lord and the fruit trees. And so the king was like, it's his right. And the woman was like, yes, it's his right. It doesn't make it right, but it's his right. So they planted the fruit trees, and someone cut down the fruit trees. And them, being responsible people, went to go tell the king, hey, somebody cut down your fruit trees. And the king was like, not the king, the lord, because the king is here and the king is being reasonable about all of this. And the lord was like, you must have cut down the fruit trees. You were going to rot in prison until you confess to it. And once you confess to it, I'm going to execute you for it. And so the peasants are just like, we have no way to win. And so they're like, okay, we'll just sit in the prison and whatever. And the boss encountered people like this in other lords' prisons, where they were thrown in there for some reason. They were thrown in there accused of mopery. And they were like, okay, sitting. And so, plus side for them, they don't have smallpox, or they might have had smallpox and died from it, but they're sitting in the Lord's thing, so they might actually be alive, though all of their family is dying of smallpox. And part of the contract with doing the land is that they have to do the work for the Lord, and then they can do their work. And because it was do the work for the Lord is this is a man, 2 boys, or a man, 3 boys, a woman, and 2 girls. Or it was a man and 3 boys doing the work. And they're like, hey, can a woman and 2 girls make up for the 3 boys who are now rotting in the prison? And the king was like, you'll make up for 2 of them. And because you're only going to make up for 2 of them, you're going to have to do extra as a fine. And the church comes along. And the church was like, okay, you owe us your 10%. That's 10% of the field. Now, so they had to do the 10% for the church. And the church is like, you're not doing it fast enough. You got to give us the faster. And so they got extra fined. And so everything was taken away by all of these people. And the poor family were like, we can't do all of this work and we have no food ourselves because all of the fine was coming out of their share of the crops. Which is, I mean, this is hideously wrong. Now, the way situations like this should work, because I mean, there are ways to do this equitably, where if I own a chunk of land and I'm not able to farm all of it myself, I can hire people in. And I can say, okay, I'm going to pay you $50 to help me harvest, $50 to help me plant, or, $1,000 or whatever, whatever seems fair. We negotiate back and forth, 50, 150, 75, 75. So you negotiate with these things. But there are other ways to do it where it's like, okay, we get a percentage. And it's like, I have the land, which at one point was cleared. Because, here you have a caveman walking through the woods, and he wants to plant wheat. So in order to plant wheat, he has to take down the trees, and he has to take away the rocks, and he has to build a wall, and then he has to plow the ground, and he has to, fertilize it, and he has to drive off the animals. And there is a lot of work in setting up a piece of land to be properly farmed. So one person way back when cleared out this big chunk of land and said, this land is mine. And because it was, unexplored, uninhabited, whatever, it was his. And he passed it on to his kids and so on. But, so that was fairly his piece of land because it was claimed out of the wilderness. It was claimed out of land that had never had a person in 10,000 years. So, and if I were to put up the piece of land and say, okay, this land is mine, I've cleared it, taken away the trees, taken away the rocks, worked the soil to make it good, we'll split the crop. You work and you plant and you harvest. And I get every other bag. So what you do is you fill up all the bags with grain. And then you say, okay, I get half and you get half. You get half for your work. I get half for all of the work that I put in over the years of clearing the land, or my father put in, or his father put in, or all of the work that was put into the land, my equity in the land of building it up and making the land something valuable. And the serf or the worker puts in sweat equity. So he puts in the equity of his labor for doing the crop. And as a result, he gets half. Now, the way the church worked, and this is going back to the Bible, this is going back way, way back in the Bible. This was Moses and the Israelites coming out of Egypt under the pharaohs hundreds and almost it's like 1,200 years before Christ, 1,200 BC. This is the law that Moses came out of the desert with. and it was a tenth was an offering to God, and that paid for the priests and the Levites who, did the worship, led the church. They also were the scribes. They also were the judges. They also were the government. They also provided for other people. So back in the biblical times, part of it was, hey, if you're poor, you'd go to the priest and you say, help me, I'm poor, and the priest would give you food. But the thing is that as part of the whole agreement, as part of the whole religion, the priest got a tenth. So if the farmer and if the serf on the big piece of land, so on the big piece of land, here you have the serf on the cleared piece of land, he does 20 bags of grain, 20 huge sacks of grain. Half of those go to the Lord. So the Lord gets 10, he gets 10. The Lord takes his 10 and gives one of his 10 to the church. And the serf takes one of his 10 and gives it to the church. Now, the way this was working, though, is the Lord took the first 10 bags. And it wasn't like, okay, you pile up all 10 bags and then you split them. He was like, okay, this is 20 bags worth of crop. You're going to give me the first 10 bags. And the church is like, hey, this is 20 bags worth of crop. You're going to give me 2 bags. And so the serfs were working as hard as they could. The woman, her husband, the kid, the daughters were working as hard as they could. And the Lord comes up, it's like, hey, where's my 10 bags? You owed me 10 bags by now. Because you can't pay me 10 bags now, I need 12. Because, part of your deal would be, that's just wrong, Especially because there's less of it, and he was asking for it sooner. So they were just all shades of in trouble. And the priest comes by, and he's like, the church wants its 2 bags. We're sorry, 2 bags. You're not good people. You're not giving your 2 bags that you have to give. So he wanted his 2 bags up front. Now, if it was a bad year of farming, so if the wheat didn't yield well, if the oats and the barley didn't yield well, then it would be, they would still want their 10 bags. They'd still want their 2 bags. The Lord would still want his 10 bags. The church would still want their 2 bags. But if there were only 15 bags, that would leave 3 for them to maybe live on. Now, I mentioned the wild animals. And this was something else that was just difficult about the serfdom. Lords were allowed to hunt and kill animals. So, here I am, I'm a lord, I have the land, I can go out, I can kill a deer, I can kill a fox, I can kill a bear, I can kill whatever I want and eat it. The peasants were not allowed to kill deer. The peasants were not allowed to kill birds. The peasants weren't allowed to kill pretty much anything bigger than a rat. They could kill a rat because who cares about the rat? The rats are vermin, the rats. But anyway, so if the crows come in and the crows start eating the grain, the peasants can't kill the crows because the Lord may want to kill the crows and eat the crows. Or the deer. The deer can come in and start eating the grain. I have friends who are farmers. And the farmers grow their, they grow their corn, they grow their wheat, they grow their buckwheat, they grow their barley, they grow their rye, they grow their whatever. And they constantly go through. And there are all sorts of deer in Pennsylvania. I mean, Pennsylvania has an incredible amount of deer. And if the farmer sees a deer eating his crop, he calls up the game commission. And even though it's not deer season, he calls up the game commission. Game commission says, okay, you have a problem deer. They send somebody out. And the game commission looks and they see the corn that's eaten that doesn't actually have corn on it yet. It's, it's just like, yay, hi. It's just like a little thing. It doesn't have corn. It doesn't have silk. It doesn't have anything. It's just a big piece of grass almost. And they see it eaten by the deer and they go, okay, yep, you have a problem deer. Here's a hunting tag. And the farmer goes out waits for the deer, shoots the deer, eats the deer, turns in the tag to the game commission, and hopefully that keeps the deer from eating the grain because, the grain looks like a great food source for the deer because, it's nice and easy, it's tasty. But at the same time, if the deer learn that they get shot or shot at when they go out into the grain, they'll stay in the woods and they'll eat fallen acorns and they'll eat shrubs and they'll eat other things and maybe not go after the corn. But these peasants weren't allowed to do that because the deer belonged to the king or belonged to the Lord. So here they are. They have to scare off the birds. They have to scare off the deer because they're not allowed to hurt them because that would be not allowed. So it's a very rough situation for these people. And the lords aren't actually getting that much extra for all of the misery they add. And that's one of the things about modern times is that we figured out that better to have a big cake. And even though you may not get as large of a percentage, you could have like a huge pizza and you get half of it. Or you could have a little piece and you get 3/4 of it. Because, if the peasants are working harder, if the peasants are better fed, they're going to be more productive. And Henry Ford figured this out. Henry Ford figured this out at the beginning of the 20th century. It was like, I need more people buying cars. He's like, people aren't buying cars because they don't have any time to spend with the cars. He's like, 5-day work week. We'll give people 2 days off on that. We'll give them Saturday and Sunday off. And Henry Ford's like, we started selling more cars because people can now go touring on the weekends. They can spend their money on my cars. It's like, hey, the sun sets pretty late in the summer. I bet if we cut the workday down to 8 hours, then people would be able to go places in the evening and have even more time to spend driving my cars. And that was Henry Ford's whole idea. It was like, okay, we'll cut back the hours and we'll shorten the work week so people can buy more stuff. And it worked. And there's weird things of productivity where if you work harder for a shorter period of time, or if you work for a shorter period of time, you'll work harder. So there are some sweet spots in there. It's like work for 15 minutes, off for 15 minutes or something like that. There was a engineer, I can't remember who did it. I'll have to look it up. But who did a study about how people work loading coal in mines. And the rule was you would load 16 tons of coal in a standard mine shift. And I think it was a 12-hour shift because of how long ago this was done. You'd load 16 tons of coal in one shift. And so that was the song. There was a song, 16 tons. And Tennessee Ernie Ford, you load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Anyway, it was 16 tons was the standard amount. And so there was this engineer. He was down in the mines. He was watching them shovel. It's like shovel, shovel, shovel. And then he started getting tired. And he still shovel, shovel, shovel. And the engineer was like, okay, let's try something. And he's like, okay, we're going to have 2 gangs. Gang 1, you just shovel away. Gang 2, he'd stop them every 15 minutes. They would shovel for 15 minutes. He'd stop them for 45 minutes. And they would just sit around and do whatever. And then they would shovel for 15 minutes and then sit around for 45 minutes. And the output went from 16 tons on the one group to 40 tons on the other group. I mean, they were shoveling, 2.5 times as much coal because they worked while they were fresh. and they relaxed, and they worked while they were fresh, and they relaxed. And so they did some fine tweaking of this, and everyone was like, "This is insane," but it worked. So let's work and take breaks, and work and take breaks. So the idea is that you do well by doing a sort of sprint and then pause and then sprint and then pause. But there are different rates of how tired you get. And actually, with humans and running, it's almost the point now where the elite runners are running almost at a sprint for an entire marathon. And that's just like insane. But anyway, so work, pause, work, pause, work, pause usually gets you done, then work until you're dead exhausted. So try and keep that in mind. But this was a very depressing chapter.